of you for coming to the library tonight. My name is Amy Resnichek, and I'm the director of the North Bend Public Library. And it is my honor to have this event this evening. I've been very, very excited about it since we were able to confirm the date. And I am going to introduce Mr. Will Cox, who is the assistant to Mr. Kleinberg.
Well, thank you all for coming. Today I'm here to introduce Milton Kleinberg. Now, for those of you who don't know, Milton is the owner and CEO of Senior Market Sales, a successful insurance brokerage company based out of Omaha. And he is also a prominent philanthropist in the Omaha area, donating to many charities such as the Chabad House of Omaha, the Institute for Holocaust Education, and many other Omaha charities. Now, before coming here today, some of you might have heard about Milton or perhaps done some research on your own. But for those of you who didn't, you should know that Milt is a man with an amazing story. Despite growing up in one of the worst times in history, Milt was able to survive thanks to great sacrifices made by his mother. And eventually, he made his way to the United States, where he was able to attend high school, go to college, join the Army, host his own radio show, and even organize his community against a group of neo-Nazis that had invaded the area. And that was all before finally becoming a successful businessman in Omaha, not too far from here. Now, for many years, Milton did not tell his story, until recently when his grandchildren began to ask questions as they were visiting concentration camps in Poland and other museums. Now, at first, Milton didn't think anyone besides his family would want to hear this story. However, upon the insistence of his family members and the Institute for Holocaust Education, Milton was convinced to publish his story into what is now known as Bread or Death, which was released in August of 2014. Now, it is my great pleasure to once again introduce to you Milton Kleinberg.
Well, welcome. It's a pleasure. Everybody's here on time. How unusual for most of the place, but not here. The trip down here was wonderful from Omaha. The grass, the corn seems to be high, and everything is good with the world. So it was a pleasure and a beautiful drive. I'm going to tell you the story. Of course, the book tells all of the story, but I will try to give you some highlights about this interesting life. Yes, as Will said, we didn't talk much about the Holocaust at home when I was growing up. My parents didn't talk much about it, and I would only mention certain events during the Sabbath dinner when we'd all sit down about talking about it. And I have two children. One is in the business with me right here in Omaha, and I have a daughter who about 15 or 20 years late, Aliyah, which means she moved to Israel. And she has 6 children, which means I have 6 grandchildren. 4 of them were born in America, and the last 2 were born in Israel. And those, I gave those grandchildren a mandate. I said, in Judaism, 12 makes a tribe. So, so what I can tell you with great pleasure, I now have 9 great-grandchildren and 2 on the way. And that's a beginning. So and Judaism has also said you have to honor your parents, and they're honoring my wishes. When you hear the story, you can see how excited I am about that. And as a matter of fact, we go to Israel just about every year. Every time they have a new child, I go to Israel. But at any rate, I wrote the book. I wrote a book in this book actually in a different version in 2010. And when the children in Israel go to high school, they take them to Auschwitz in Poland to visit the concentration camp. And every time one of the children were going there, Usually around 1 o'clock in the morning, I get a call, "Grandpa, I'm going to be someplace where you were born. Could you tell us something about it?" So I would jump on the computer and send them a little letter, and they would read it in front of the other kids, and they all loved it. So then, after a while, the pressure built up. They petitioned my wife, and they wanted to know the details, what really happened during the war. And another incident that happened, and you will read it in the book as well, is when I got to be 65, I applied for Social Security benefits, and the people there wanted my birth certificate. And I started laughing. "What do you mean birth certificate? They destroyed the whole country. You don't think they saved my birth certificate?" So this guy said, "Humor me." He gave me an address of the Warsaw Embassy in Washington, D.C., and gave me a letter, and I filled it out and sent it in. I never thought they were going to come back with anybody. And then I said, "What happens if we don't get anything?" He says, "Well, then you are who you say you are, and when you are." So, to my disbelief, about 6 weeks later, I get my birth certificate, written in Polish. Of all things. And the big advantage about this birth certificate is because I found out my mother's maiden name and how it's spelled, and I found my name of my father and how it's spelled, and the significance of that if I wanted to look for my relatives. And it was about the time they opened up the Eastern Bloc with the archives, so you can find some, you can go look for your relatives. So I found my mother's maiden name, which was a big deal. Her maiden name is Hopcher. Can you imagine trying to spell that? You can't even sneeze it right. So I found it, and then there was a gentleman from Canada who said he is a genealogist, and he says I speak Polish, Russian, German, Hebrew, and Yiddish. So he says I can help you find your relatives. So I send in a letter to him to find my relatives. And there too, about a month later, he comes back and he says, "You know, it's a strange thing, but I have friends. My name used to be Davidovich, as you'll find out, I'll tell you." And he says, "I have a couple of Davidoviches who live next door to me. Could they be your relatives?" So I said, "Well, just have them write a few things about their father." And when I read what they said about my father, I knew right away that was the guy. My father used to love pigeons. The pigeons got fed before we did. And he also, they called him a dryer, which means he turns everything upside down. So I said, "Yeah, that's him. No question about it." Anyways, the long and short of it, I found my relative. And then 2009, my younger grandson was getting married in Israel, and they asked if I would come and meet with him. So during that time, I came and met with him. And I found out I had 4 half-sisters and a half-brother who lived in Israel since 1951. So we got reunited. I left them last in Poland about 62 years ago, and I had no expectations of it happening, but they were found. So, all together, the family, the children, the grandchildren, siblings that were born after the war, they all wanted to know what happened. So I promised I would write a book. So the first book was written in 2010. It was a large 5-color book. It's the same story, but it's a little bit different. And I self-published 500 copies in English and 200 copies in Hebrew. But I didn't think anybody else would be interested in my story. but they passed it around like it was hotcakes. So we put it on Amazon. I think there's some seeds up here, right? They put it on Amazon, and then the director of Holocaust Studies came over to me. He says, your book is unique about the Holocaust, and would you want to republish it so it can be used as a high school manual? Which makes this book a little bit different than most Holocaust studies, because the Holocaust talks about the concentration camps in Poland, which justifiably so. But nobody talks about the part of the Holocaust that occurred in Russia. And I deal with the Holocaust that occurred in Russia. So she republished it. What she did, something interesting, she had focus groups of students, historians, the teachers, and they made some recommendations. And the recommendations they made is incorporated in this book. Where's the book? Oh, okay. The book in the box. It's called Bread or Death. The reason they wanted the book changed is the other book was worth about $75. He says for $75 it's going to be on the top shelf every place, but nobody will buy it. So they wanted it down to under $20. The other thing is the first book starts when I'm 75 and going backwards, and it ends when I came to America in 1951. Everybody wanted to know what happened to me after when I came to America. So that book includes that too. And the teachers wanted, the other book had the history of the time woven into the story. And they want to study the history, so they put part of the history on the side, a page, so the teachers can study that separately of that time period. And it has lessons, study lessons. So it's a good book for high school. High schools are beginning to pick it up and do this. But this is how we got this president. Now, let me get to the story. My name is Milton Kleinberg. However, I was born Mendel Dawidowicz in Pawiniec, Poland on January 28, 1937. A little bit before you. It was absolutely the worst of all time in all Jewish history, and the worst of all places to be born to Jewish parents. Hitler and his propaganda minister Goebbels began to rant about the Jews, and they were relentless propagandists. On November 8th of 1938, they organized a nationwide attack on Jewish people, and their stores. And they broke all the windows throughout the night. And that was called Night of Broken Glass, or Kristallnacht, as it was known. And we knew what was the beginning of war. And they were, of course, getting ready to occupy Europe. So do you know what a bar mitzvah is? So my odds of becoming bar mitzvah at that time was slim to none. The war began on September 1, 1939, when the German army invaded Poland from the west, and the Russian allies invaded Poland from the east 17 days later, dividing the country between them. And the demarcation line was the River Bug. On one side was the Soviet Union, on the other side was Germany. The German, 8 days after the war started, German troops were marching in lockstep down the cobblestone streets of Pawiniec. And immediately they began to repress the Jewish population, separate them from the of the population. And on the Jewish New Year, they destroyed the synagogue and made it into a barn. Western Poland was annexed to Germany and chained to Wonderland. That was the name of the new country. One of the edicts was that no Jews will be permitted to live in any German territory. And now we are German territory. To us it meant, very simply, forced deportation. On a cold December morning, the German troops surrounded our street, Ulica Kościelna, and forcibly evacuated. They came in there with breaking up doors, with the bayonets and with everything, just horror, just terrifying everybody. They marched us out to the street. We had less than an hour to grab what we could carry. And then they lined us up 4 abreast. They marched us down to the center of town, right down. I think we have that. They marched us down right to the train station. At the train station, there were about 20 cattle cars attached to a locomotive. The stench from the cattle cars was just horrendous. It appeared that the cattle were just unloaded and we were taking their place. Then the Germans herded us into those cattle cars so tight there was hardly enough room to turn around. After 36 hours on the train without food, water, or sanitation, the train stopped in a city called Sedlitz and we were ordered out. We got out of the train, got the cold air was like a slap in the face. But it was actually invigorating just to get off those trains. And for a minute, grumbling bellies sort of took a rest. Then they lined us up again and they marched us down to the Jewish section of town where they had okay, do I have to hold it up? Everybody can hear me, right? Oh, good. They marched us down to the Jewish section of town to a burned out synagogue. I think it's here someplace. Burned out synagogue. The synagogue was still, it was out, but it was still, you had sparks and areas that were still smoldering in there. The smell of flesh was very powerful. They wanted us to go into the synagogue, but we were reluctant to go in, fearful that once inside, they would torch the shul again with us inside. However, a couple of the soldiers tried to reassure us, and they said there's bread and water inside, but it won't be there very long. So we overcame our fear, and we walked into the synagogue. There in the synagogue we found space next to our relatives who were deported with us. Once we got settled in, my brother Herschel, who was a year younger, I was about 4 at that time, he was a year younger, saw an elderly man with a white beard, wrapped in a prayer shawl, having the prayer book in his hand, running around the torched bima or altar, arguing or talking out loud to an invisible person. Most of the people in the synagogue ignored him because they knew that his son and wife was burnt in the synagogue, so they felt that he lost his balance, and so they just let him walk around. But of course, being kids, we went out to find out what he was doing. So my brother and I asked him who he was talking to. He looked at us with the 2 most saddest eyes in the world and says, "I'm talking to the angel of death." I said, "Well, we can't see him." He says, nobody but me can see him. He says also that if I continue saying the Shema, which is a Jewish prayer, then he won't take me. For 2 days we watched this tortured man running around and arguing with the angel of death. On the 3rd day, he came over, gave my mother some of his belongings, and to my father he took out a white handkerchief, he had some money wrapped in it, and he gave it to him. He says, I won't need it anymore. The angel of death showed me what the future has in store for me, and I want no part of it. Then, with a resolute voice, he put his hand on my left shoulder, and he told my parents, you have to cross the riverboat to the Russian side. Over there, there's still some hope, but here, there's nothing but death and misery. Then he quietly went back to the torch altar area. He took off his jacket, he folded it up neatly, laid it on the scorched floor. Then he took off his prayer shawl, he folded that up and put it on top of his jacket. Then he gently put the prayer book on his jacket. He said this last prayer. Then he quietly lay down, put his head on the prayer book, and he died. Now, I don't recall if he ever told us his name or not, but in my dreams, he calls himself Abraham. And to this day, and I see him quite often. And to this day, to me, he's Abraham. Well, my parents took Abraham's word to heart. The next day, they went out, found a Polish guard who had an old, dilapidated, split-bottom wooden boat, who they bribed to take us across to the Russian side. The trip to the Russian side is a story of its own, and I really don't have enough time to go into it. I guess you're just going to have to buy a book. Anyways, when we crossed the Russian side, we were arrested immediately by the NKVD, which later became the KGB, the Russian police. And they sent, in a day or two, they shipped us down to a Bialystok, which is an enclosed prison or enclosed, I guess you can call it a prison, of Poles, all kinds of all nationalities, Jewish and non-Jewish alike. We were all earmarked for deportation deep into Russia, slave labor camps. So from there, we spent a few months, and on February of 1940, we were told to go to the train station, and in the train station, they packed us into boxcars. The Russian boxcars are much bigger than the cattle cars. On the Russian cars, they carry cargo most of the time. And, but we were all packed in there. It was also tight, but manageable. And from there, we were shipped. We didn't know where we were going. We didn't know what to expect. We were shipped about 700 miles to a place called Arkhangelsk. Arkhangelsk is located north in the most eastern part of European Russia, right next to the Finnish border. Arkhangelsk is a lumber town. It consists of small wooden huts and wooden sidewalks, at least at that time. That's what it consisted. And everybody was assigned work in that place. We had gold mines, lumber yards, wood clearing, and we were located in a kolkhoz, which is a collective farm. We all lived together in a very, very small house in that thing for over a year. We were just about getting used to the place. and my young brother Velvo was born there. I forgot to tell you when we left, probably because my mother was pregnant, but it was a secret then. So anyways, my brother Velvo was born. Then in spring, May of 1941, the Russians realized that their allies were no longer allies. The German attacked Russia across a 1,000-mile border. It was called Barbarossa when they went across, and huge, and they were going at blitzkrieg speed, fast, and they were coming down to Leningrad, which is now St. Petersburg, Moscow, in that area. And Arkhangelsk is way above there. So we were given orders to pack to get ready for resettlement. The resettlement, we didn't know where or when or how, but my mother, who was pretty good at bribing people, she found out that we're either going to Siberia, deep into Siberia, or we're going to Samarkand, Uzbekistan, which is Central Asia. I couldn't think of Central Asia. The whole place. Going to Central Asia. We were hoping we were going to go to Central Asia, but we weren't sure. But in the end, we found out that we're going to Central Asia. The journey from Arkhangelsk across Russia, 11 time zone, to Samarkand is 4,500 miles. It is a long, long way. Nobody ever appreciates how big Russia is until you go across it. It is huge. Going on the Trans-Siberian line, in normal conditions, the trip would take about 2 or 3 weeks. But unfortunately, we weren't traveling in normal times. We were traveling in the heat of battle. Bombs were falling all over the place, and that 3 months, those 3 weeks extended our journey across Russia to 3 horrific months. And those 3 horrific months really took their toll on a lot of people. We were assigned to a boxcar with about 35 other men, women, and children. And our train and several trains behind them, we were all heading in the same direction. What happened during that time period, Stalin ordered all of the industry and everything and the labor force to be moved inside Russia or Uzbekistan or Samarkand, in those areas. So we were all going together. And as a matter of fact, many of those factories and everything were moved at the same time. Well, in this time, on this trip, there was 5 of us. My mother was nursing Velvo. I was responsible for my younger brother Herschel, and my father was responsible for supplementing the ration cards. We were given passports with polls stamped on it and ration cards that entitled a person to 550 grams of bread, which is about a pound. It's barely enough to keep soul and body together, but without that, you wouldn't survive. So we were on that train, all of us traveling together, but at the train stops, my parents were pretty good at bartering. They traded everything they had to get extra food, especially milk for Velvo, because my mother was drying out and she needed an extra milk. So there was 5 of us traveling on the train. The first part of the journey, we were still a cohesive, strong family. And we handled ourselves as best as we could. Somehow my father and mother managed, when they got off the train, they always come back with some extra food and milk available. On the last part of about halfway through, I would say, we stopped in a small Russian town, somewhere between Omsk and Novosibirsk, and my father got off to barter for some food, and he never came back. We were just frantic. We were stranded, 5 of us were stranded on that train with just being completely dependent on our neighbors. However, what was worst of all, he had with him the money, our ration cards, and he also had the passports. And without the passports, you couldn't get new ration cards, and without the ration cards, you couldn't get food. And you talk about bureaucracies. They are #1 bureaucracies in the world. They don't care. You know, if you don't have ration cards, you don't get food. You don't have passports, you're nobody. So anyways, it was a difficult journey, and there's a lot of interesting stories in there. There again, I'm going to have to just select 1 or 2 stories and give you just a taste of how difficult that journey was. A Polish woman in a boxcar who also had terrible luck when she left Poland. Her husband died in Archangelsk, and her older son died in an accident under the train. He was collecting coal for the stove, and the train moved and cut him in half. And the woman was just horrified. So my mother befriended her and helped her with the child that she had while she recovered. So now the woman's last child died from typhoid malnutrition. And she came over to my mother to thank her for her kindness during the black days, as she calls it. And then she took out her passport, her ration cards, and gave it to my mother and said, use those. The Poles won't be able to tell us apart anyways. And the Russian guards won't be able to tell us apart anyways, and this will help you to get some bread and some of the other rations that you couldn't get to. Which, in a way, I think she's partially responsible for saving our lives. However, she was very distraught. She clutched her baby in her hand, strong. She opened the sliding door of the train. We were coming around the bend, and another train was coming from the other direction. And before anybody could react, she says, I have nothing to live for. I gave everything I have to this cursed land, and she jumped. Before anybody could react. And all of us have seen that quite along the way. It was no stranger. But this woman's action shook us all up. It just something that hit us right deep. Deep. After she jumped, there was such a quiet in the boxcar, and you could hear tears coming out of people's eyes. But she touched us all. But unfortunately, it was so late for my brother Bedouin, who died on the train, on the last day of the train. He also was malnourished and typhoid, the 2 killers of children in particular. Then on fall of 1941, the train door opened for the last time, and a tall blonde Russian soldier with medals all over him. I could still see those medals bouncing around. yelled out, "Welcome to Samarkand, the jewel of the Orient. Take everything with you, you're not coming back," on the train. So we were all excited about that. But my mother was holding Bengal and she wanted to know what they could do. And someone took the baby from her. We were relocated to Samarkand to supplement the labor pool that was dwindling. Samarkand has two commodities, which is very important to the war effort and required a lot of labor. One was tobacco and the other one was cotton. Now, the cotton, of course, everybody can understand. Tobacco those days, it was also a commodity, very, very important. As a matter of fact, tobacco was a commodity that was used to barter and bribe people, but because you couldn't have money in Russia. If you had money, they didn't look favorably upon you. So anyways, my mother's first assignment was to work in a cotton gin. And what they were doing is picking out raw seeds from the cotton, separating it. The seeds went to the oil and the cotton went to making cloth. Anybody here ever had cotton, grow cotton? If you grow cotton, you can understand.
Sorry. Your microphone stand
Okay.
You can tighten it up. Oh.
Keeps on falling. You guys keep an eye on that. She worked in the cotton gin. It was hard work, boring as hell. Sit on those little chairs next to the floor, and the women were yelling and talking and picking out those seeds. And the commissars would come by and stop talking, pick the seeds. And it was difficult. About 6 months later, she got a little bit, maybe a year later, she got a break. The Russians were making a propaganda film how the Polish volunteers are helping Russia to win the war and free their country. So they made a film and she was chosen as a model. She had one of those faces that could pass as a gypsy, Uzbek, or of course European, either way, so they chose her. And she worked there for close to a year. Then she had a friend, Aya, who worked in the tobacco factory, and she had like a shack. She and another lady, and that lady died, and she encouraged mother to come and move in with her and get the job in the tobacco factory. Together they developed a scheme where they would steal small quantities of tobacco, share it with the guards and the manager, and they made a living. It was risky, but she felt it was worth the risk because tobacco was the currency of trade, of bribing. Everything went on the tobacco. And she lived there, and we worked there. She worked there. It also gave my brother and I a chance to be in a kindergarten. Then, in July, I think it was summer of '42, my brother Herschel caught malaria, suffered with it for over a year, and in spite of my mother's bribing skills with getting doctors and medication, he died. And that was devastating for both of us for a very long time. After my brother's death, my mother managed, with her friend, they managed to get me into a Polish children's home. That Polish children's home was located outside town, about 10 miles. It was called the Old Black Road. The Black Road goes way back to Genghis Khan's time. It was the Silk Road, where merchandise traveled from there to Iran. So, and it was always infested with thieves, and that hasn't changed, thieves and bandits. But it was very difficult for her to come and see me, but I was assigned to this children's home. In this children's home, I became of age. I and two like-minded boys, Edmund and Piotr, organized our club in back of the outhouse, and from that club, we called that club Argentina. And the reason it's Argentina is because the teacher read a book from Argentina where young people had a club and they had a garden and they visited the garden all the time, so we called it Argentina. From there we planned how we raid the orchard across the street and the vegetable garden about a mile down on the Black Road. And that was our plotting all the time. One day when we were hiding in the vegetable garden, waiting for the workers to leave, the last two workers was in Uzbek and a Russian. And they were arguing, and all of a sudden the Uzbek pulled a knife and cut the Russian. The Russian reached in his pocket, pulled out a switchblade, and stabbed the Uzbek repeatedly in the stomach until he fell down. When the Uzbek fell down, the Russian looked around. We were hiding, so he didn't see us. And then he threw away the knife. And when he threw away the knife, we were zeroing in where he was throwing that knife, and he ran away. My friends wanted to leave in a hurry, and I said, no, I'm going to stay here and find the knife. Edmund went back, but Piotr stayed with me, found the knife. I wiped it off and put it in my pocket. Now that knife was a lifesaver on several occasions, which was a very, very worthwhile knife. We, in 1943, we had several occasions where we had close calls. I had another knife fight. Our friend Edmund was kidnapped by Russian soldiers that tried to sell him for slave labor, and we rescued him. I was shot in the leg, and a couple other incidents. But let me tell you about one incident, because I think that is interesting. One day we were walking on the Black Road, and a horse-drawn cart came close to the edge and spilled some apples in the ditch. So the three of us jumped into the ditch. We loaded our shirts with apples and got up on the Black Road. And as we look around, there was an Uzbek sitting on a donkey, as drunk as could be, swearing up and down in Russian and in Uzbek, and yelling and screaming. Then he saw us with the apples in our shirt. He dismounted, came over, ripped open my shirts, the apples fell to the ground, and then he said in his language, "I'll teach you Karabchik." Karabchik is a thief. Thieves something. Then he grabbed his curved knife, took a swing at my throat. I jumped back, I missed him, but he caught me in the armpit. Then my friend grabbed his walking stick, and hit to his back besides the head. His back went down on his knees, and he dropped the knife. When he dropped his knife, the adrenaline kicked in. I went into my pocket, I grabbed my knife and stabbed him in the throat. The look on his face with his blood running from his throat was something we never forgot. Then he was back, tried to reach for his knife again, and as he did, I stabbed him twice more in the stomach. Somehow he managed to pick himself up, get on the donkey, and the donkey, with his human cargo on the back, walked away on the Black Road, and it walked all the way to the entrance of the orchard, where he slid off and died. That was one time. Another time is I saw next to enclosed pens a wagon of peaches. So the three of us went up there and we grabbed a couple of peaches and put it in our pocket. We thought nobody was looking, and as we were riding the Black Road, we heard a couple shots. We figured they tried to scare us. Oh, they did a hell of a good job. We ran like hell. Not only that, I ran all the way to the entrance to the children's home. I didn't even drop my peaches. And then Piotr looks at my leg and he says, Mendel, you are bleeding. I took a look. Sure enough, I was hit on the right knee, but I was lucky. The bullet missed the bone. He just went around it. But that was it. Anyways, there are several other situations that happened in there. You know, like I said before, you know what to do. The war in Europe ended on May 8, 1945. The Russians pardoned all the Polish deportees. We were actually prisoners until then, but they pardoned us, so we can go back to Poland. The whole world was celebrating the end of war in Europe, but we didn't know it at the time, but there was no big celebration by the Jewish people after we found out what happens to our relatives and everybody else. But the children's home with all the staff and everybody were sent forward to Breslau, Poland. And we wound up in a children's home there. My mother came 2 weeks later to meet up with us in Breslau. Then in Breslau, in that children's home, the three of my friends and I, the two friends and I were separated, and we never saw each other again. But Piotr was reunited with his father, who happened to be in a hospital, and Edmund was reunited with his mother, who just came out of a concentration camp. And wouldn't you believe it, I was reunited with my father. There was only one catch. He already had a wife and 2 children. And my mother was coming to a very big surprise. So, anyways, we came back to Poland. The saddest day in Poland was when we came to Pavonius, we couldn't see one recognizable Jewish face in the entire city. We couldn't hear the peddlers singing, the smells, the Jewish signs on the stores. It was all gone. It's as though we never existed. And to add insult to injury, our Polish neighbors made it very clear that Jews were no longer welcome in this new Poland. So as Jews have done hundreds of times before, we packed what was left of our shattered lives and we moved on. In Breslau, the war changed everything for everybody for all times. Nothing was ever the same. Breslau before the war was a German town. There were many synagogues there. The Germans destroyed all the synagogues. and they didn't destroy one synagogue because that was next to German shrine, something like that. But that's the only synagogue standing. So people who came to Breslau had a bulletin board where people would put notes to see if someone is alive, and they would gather there. My mother was sitting on a bench in Breslau. Her first order of business was, of course, to get a get, which means a divorce. In Judaism, you don't marry anybody unless you have a get. So she went to the rabbi, and the rabbi agreed to give her a get. But the problem was she couldn't read or write, so she didn't quite understand what to do. So Aaron Kleinberg sat down next to my mother and asked her if he could help. Well, Aaron Kleinberg also came to Breslau to look for his wife and 2 daughters he left behind. Breslau was occupied by the Russians during the invasion, and they deported him. They put him in the army and deported him to Siberia, where he worked building tanks, the T-34 tank for the Russians. So when he came back, he was also looking for that. So when they sat down and they started talking, they realized that they both have to look for a different world, or make a different world for themselves. So my mother hit it off with Aaron, and they decided to make plans for the future. I first met Aaron when he came, and my mother came to pick me up at my birth father's house. He wasn't there, which was a good thing. And he was a very pleasant, good-looking man, quiet, and I liked him right from the beginning. When he talked to me, he didn't talk to me like to a child. He talked to me like I was an adult, and I appreciated that. He grabbed my hand and he says, "Okay, let's go see the rest of the world." And that's what we went to. So we made plans how to escape from Germany. The interesting thing is about my father, Aaron, he had a brother in Breslau, not in Breslau, in Belgium, Antwerp, Belgium, who had a restaurant. And he survived with his wife and children, and he wanted my father to come there. So our plan was to get reunited with him. But if you don't have any passports, anything, you had to do the other way. So we escaped. The plan was to go to Germany, to be involved in a DP camp, displaced persons camp, and from there we're going to go to Belgium to get reunited with my uncle, his brother. We crossed into Germany and we wound up in several several camps in West Germany, several DP camps in West Germany. In one camp, we were getting ready to go across, escape there, so we hired a smuggler who was going to smuggle us into Holland and from Holland into Belgium. But we got caught. So that means they sent us back to Germany. Dad spent 3 months in jail. He spent 3 months in the same jail that Hitler was, but he was during the push. But anyways, we were back in Germany. We spent 5 years in Germany, various DP displaced persons camp. In one camp called Wasseralfingen, my mother married Aaron Kleinberg. That's where my name comes from. And my sister Bessie and Goldie were born there. From there, in 1951, they were liquidating the displaced persons camps, and they were looking for a place to go to be accepted. We were planning to go to Palestine, which is Israel, but when we got to Bremenhaven, we found out that the Arabs attacked Israel, and there's bloody war going on. So they had to wait a long time to get there. So we were given other options. We were thinking to go to Australia, and they too were filled out. So the unlucky was the most lucky day of our life. We finally got we got a ship. The U.S. General R.M. Letchford. We got passage on that ship to the United States. We didn't know whether we were lucky or not, but we just went with the flow. We didn't know anything about America. The only thing I knew about America is Tom Mix and the cowboy boots. Some of you might not know who Tom Mix is. I knew who it was. And we arrived in America on May 14, 1951 in New York Harbor. And from there, we were actually earmarked to go to Boston. We had a sponsor in Boston. When we got there, the sponsor died. So the Jewish agency found a different sponsor for us in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. So we went by train to Milwaukee, Wisconsin.